You're not unmuting.
Over to Dan Clark, who's going to give us a riveting talk on Steinbier brewing.
Who I think he muted himself. I'm going to unmute him though.
Yeah, I did. Yep, I did. I did mute myself, and I couldn't unmute it.
It's okay. I turned off the ability to unmute. That way we don't have any pranksters or maringolos.
All right. So, welcome to my house, everybody. So I'm here to give a talk about Steinbier. It's probably one of my favorite processes. I try to do it, at least once, twice a year. Basically, a Steinbier is it's more of a process than an actual style. It's where you actually use hot rocks in order to heat up the mash, heat up your boil up to a boil with it. They used to use this in the times before there was actually metal kettles and you could direct fire anything. So usually the boil was done in, the mash and the boil was done in like a wooden vessel. And you would heat up hot rocks in a fire, and then you would put it into the mash to bring it up to temp. I figured I'd give you guys just a quick rundown of how I do it. So I actually am in the middle of doing one right now. So here's a couple of things that I like to use. If you're gonna do it yourself, you'll probably want to get yourself a really good pair of gloves. I usually use these. Actually, I use these guys right here in the back. They're welding gloves because the rocks, when they come out of my blast furnace back here, are in around 1200 degrees. So these are some of the other tools that I use. You got, just your fire pokers and some tongs to get the rocks out, and just the random shovel. These are some of the different rocks that I'll use. I use granite. Traditionally, you would use something called gray whack. It's a metamorphic sandstone, but basically sort of any granite will do. So something with a bigger grain structure like this, what ends up happening is they shatter. And they become extremely brittle. So you can, once they're out of the blast furnace, you can basically just break them apart with your hand, like that. So that being said, there is a real big chance of these rocks exploding, which I had actually texted Ed a little earlier. One of my runs back to the furnace was I had a rock explode on me. It's, yeah. Gets a little scary sometimes. So, kind of some of the other things that I need and I use, something to start the fire with. I've got, a couple of different propane torches. Fire extinguisher. Also really important when you're doing this is to have a means of putting out this fire. And I actually grabbed my face shield just in case. So another thing that I like to do is I like to keep some fire extinguishers, bucket of water. So this right here is the beast. This is a blast furnace that I made from an old smoker, a length of gutter, and a worm fan, basically. This allows me to get that fire really, really, really hot. And what happens is, let me open this guy up. So we have we have the air that just travels underneath this fire and it feeds it right from the bottom. So the faster the fan goes, the hotter this gets. And we will heat these rocks up to about 1200 or so degrees and around there. Wow. Then once we get them nice and hot, you need somewhere to put them. So when we do the real big boil, usually I do this in a 35-gallon batch in a wooden 55-gallon Jim Beam barrel. But for today's demonstration, basically I'm using a colander. So what I'll be doing is taking the rocks from the furnace, I'll be putting them in this colander. And then once they're in that colander, and they're gonna go right into the kettle. And now what this will do, sorry for all the moving around, guys. And so now what that does is by dropping these superheated rocks into the wort, it creates a super boil right away. As soon as those rocks hit, they start boiling the wort right up. And it's pretty medieval and it's pretty impressive if you've never seen it before.
Hey, Dan, real quick, do you want to take questions as they come up, or do you want to wait for the end to take questions?
Sure, I can take questions whenever.
Okay, because Charles
Now is fine.
Charles is raising his hand. I'll unmute him.
All right.
So you're using a colander. If you had rocks that weren't going
Yes.
to fall apart or explode on you because they were of, say, a better density or a stronger sort of nature of the rocks, could you put them in directly, or do you still not want to do that because of any contamination issues?
Yes. So, nope. So what ends up happening? Usually when we do the bigger boil, I'll use like cobblestones first, real big ones, and those will go directly in. And we'll also use something like a strainer basket, which is just what this colander is just kind of a strainer basket so that we can raise and lower the rocks in.
All right, great.
The only thing about these rocks with the different grain structure, the bigger grain structure, and if they do explode back there, usually they don't explode with any sort of force. You'll hear them break and crack in the fire. Sometimes they will, but they don't usually explode when you're taking them out.
Josh has a question.
What's that?
Oh.
Excellent.
Hey, hey, I was just curious if you had any or seen any difference between using really smooth rocks and really rough rocks and how they heat the wort. Like an ocean wash stone
not how they
versus one
heat.
you pulled out of the field,
So not in how they heat the wort, but how they heat up in the fire.
Oh,
Usually your smoother rocks, your smoother grained rocks, something like this that's nice and smooth grained.
Yeah.
This will heat nice and even. Whereas something with a little bit more texture to it, it may pop. So some of the difference in the quartz will actually heat different than the rest of the minerals, and they'll pop out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Do you put the rocks right into the boil and don't take them out, or do you take them out and reheat them?
So some, when we do the bigger one, some stay in all the time. Usually I do put a few in first, no basket, they stay in the whole time. And then I'll use the ones in the strainer basket to kind of fine tune the boil over the hour. And then you can take them back out depending on how many you have. You can take them back out and reheat them. These guys have been in the fire now for about 3 hours or so.
And Rich has his hand raised as well, but he looks to be concentrating on his beer.
Hey, gotta multitask like a champion here. All right, so my question is, when you're doing a Steinbier, do you find that you get a lot more significantly more caramelization of the sugars because you're applying direct heat from the rocks to the actual physical wort itself, as opposed to like your burner to your kettle to the worts?
Yeah, I noticed a little bit more. The last Steinbier that we did, I'm not a whole 100% sure whether you kind of noticed it in that. But what also I do is I save some of the rocks. After they've been in the fire, I take them back because this is actually the color of the rocks almost. So they went in about this color, and they come out this color with all the sugar burnt on them. This is an old one that I used. Still has the sugar burnt on it.
That's amazing.
And
Great way to make
I also will put a
hard
few
candy.
of these in the fermenter as well. Yeah. Yep. So I do save some to go into the fermenter afterwards, and because the yeast will actually eat the burnt sugars off of the rock and metabolize that.
Nice. That's awesome. It'd be cool. It'd be a cool side-by-side experiment to do, like the same recipe, one with hot rocks, the other one just regular.
Yep. I have noticed that it does tend to pick up a minerally taste to it sometimes.
That was another. Yeah, cool.
Sometimes it is like licking a rock. Could be. But it does age out. I've actually had a beer that wasn't very. It's okay when it's green. Then one of these beers took on a real minerally taste, not in a good way. But then that aged out, and it was one of the best. It was one of the best beers that I've made.
Nice, awesome.
Great. I've got Alex is getting unmuted for his question. Alex.
All right, cool.
Yeah.
Hey, Dan, so you've done multiple Steinbiers
Yeah.
now. I've only done one
Yes.
personally. Have you ever done a fermentation with the rocks in the fermenter?
Yes. Every one of them I do with the rocks in the
Oh,
fermenter.
really? Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Because I know the only one I've made was with Jamie and Jake. I did the non-rock fermentation. Jamie did the rock fermentation. His got fucked up, unfortunately. So never really got to taste them side by side. So do you think the rocks being in the ferment like adds that super mineral character, or do you think that's already contributed to from the boil?
Since I've never done it the other way, I don't know.
Yeah, that was our hope of going a side by side, but it never came to
Put them in.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Josh.
Yeah, Dan, I was wondering if you've read or researched anything about the kind of rocks that you should not use. If there's anything like silica or any sort of other, minerals that might leach out that are bad for you.
Yeah. So I've actually had experience with like flagstone or sandstone, something that's very porous.
Yeah.
As soon as any moisture gets inside of it, and then you put it in the fire, those tend to explode violently. I had one, the first Steinbier that we did, and actually I think we're going to link the YouTube video to it later on. So I have probably about a 10-minute video from the first Steinbier that I did.
That's crazy.
And we had stone, and it actually rained that day, so the flagstones got wet. And I put them in the fire, and they started exploding like gunshots. And they made the top of this blast furnace move. 3-foot long iron door, and it was moving.
Wow.
Every day they sounded like gunshots.
How about like chemically though, like I don't know what kind of, like gypsum or something where you could, or like silicone or cobalt or something that's actually like, a mineral that might be dangerous to consume.
Yeah. So if you think it's dangerous to consume, don't put it in there. You don't want it in your wort.
That's good advice.
So basically I found that, traditionally there is this, there's this stuff called gray wacky. It is a metamorphic sandstone. So it's a sandstone that has been transformed by heat before this and turned almost like into a marble. So it's something with real tight grain structure, like marble are the best. They hold the heat the best. And the biggest thing is they stand up to the thermal shock of being reheated, heated, cooled rapidly, and then reheated again. They can do that without breaking down like granite, like this, like this granite does.
Yeah.
All right, we got 2 more questions here.
I just saw Dave Ruffino had, I believe, put up. Yes, Michael Jackson did do a Bear Hunter series on this, and it's actually great. I believe it's episode 2, and it's probably maybe 20 minutes in. They do a he goes to the Rauschenfels brewery in Germany, and they show how they do it commercially. And I believe they stopped producing in 1982-ish and around there. But they used beechwood fire, and that's actually what I have going back here. I cut down a beechwood tree a couple of years ago, and so beechwood gets really hot. And they used the gray whack in this gigantic bird cage. They put it in. They're actually burning like trees in that video. It's really, really impressive. And then they bring that whole thing in on a gantry, and then they drop it directly into the fermenter. Not the fermenter. They drop it directly into the boil kettle. And then they do save rocks afterwards for going in the fermenter itself.
So
no, Derek, it's the wrong Michael Jackson.
So we've got
the other one.
Yeah.
We've got 2 more questions for you if you want to take them or if you want to hold. It's up to you. I'm just letting you know how many there are.
About these stones, the gray whack, I think it is.
Yep.
Have you ever tried sourcing that or trying this with something like marble, or is that completely cost prohibitive?
Nope. I've actually used marble, and I believe that Lincoln Greystone is technically gray whack. I think I've found a source for it here. It's just a matter of going and getting it.
Cool.
But it is popular to no, not Lincoln, like Lincoln Chafee. Lincoln, Lincoln, Rhode Island. There is an outcropping of it in Lincoln, Rhode Island.
Right on.
All right, and then Dan, you are unmuted momentarily. Any second now.
Hello. My question is, what's the smoke level in the final product? Is it as smoky as like a Rausch beer, or is it more subdued?
It's very subdued. I haven't really got a lot of smoke flavor off of any of them.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Any other questions, or Dan, do you have more to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'm ready to drop some stones and let's see what happens.
Let's catch the explosion.
Yeah.
Let me see if I can drop this a little bit, if you guys can see.
I'm gonna spotlight. So hopefully, it doesn't change. Somebody else starts talking like I am.
Don't worry, I've got 911 on speed dial right here.
Oh, there we go.
Dial 911 and wait.
There he goes.
The weirdest barbecue I've ever seen.
I know, right? Oh, so, there it goes.
It's just
got your fireproof boots on.
It's too bright in my garage to actually get how really red these rocks are.
We can see them from a distance, though. When you first take them out of the fire, there, yeah, we can see them there.
Yeah. So. Let's see if I can get. It'd be so much better if I had somebody else here, so you guys can kind of see and hear it.
Dan, you haven't invested in a cameraman in the 2 weeks that we've been talking about this?
I know, huh? I'm horrible. I am such a horrible person.
It's almost like Ribs is really low budget. I mean,
right. I don't know if you can kind of hear it at all.
Oh, I could hear it when you first dumped it in there.
Very good.
Yeah, so I guess it wasn't as climactic as I thought it was going to be, guys. Sorry.
I heard it bubbling away
over the internet.
Yeah, I could hear it boiling.
So how I don't know if you already answered this question because I was kind of manning the lines.
That's about how hot they get right there.
Nice.
Nice.
So once you put the rocks in, how long do you leave them in there for?
Usually I'll go for probably about 10, 15 minutes or so before I'll take them out and put new ones in.
Okay.
And usually I'll put those back in the fire.
And you were saying, and you keep this going for how long?
You can you can get it rolling for a good hour. I've had them going. I've had a 30-gallon batch up for 2 hours just with hot stones.
And at this point,
once it gets up to once the main boil temperature gets up, it's real easy to maintain it.
And once you do that, have you ever? Are you at that point in time like dumping in hops and stuff like that, or?
Yep. As soon as this comes up to a boil, I'm gonna put in some hops. I got a 60-minute addition on it, and then sometimes I'll just do this and just kind of pop in a stone or two. I wish you guys could smell it. As soon as you actually have these rocks dumped down, you can just smell the sugars. You can smell it caramelizing.
I think it would be really cool to do something like a Steinbier, but go like you have the ancient aspect of the Steinbier if you were to go the ancient aspect of brewing before hops were known and make a Steinbier gruit.
Oh yeah.
Well, they also use the Steinbier technique for sautés. Those are traditionally Steinbiers, and we're gonna try to do that soon as well. My neighbor Don is currently hollowing out a tree so that we can make a kurna, which is the mash tun that you would make a sauté in.
Nice.
That's awesome.
We should talk, Dan. I can tell you how not to make a sauté.
Hey, wasn't it your sauté? I thought it was pretty good.
Maybe, but I could give you the recipe, but I didn't care for it. So.
So when I turn the so on my blast furnace, when I turn it down, like I turned it off, but now if I turn the blower on, you can see it kind of gets a whole lot hotter once you turn the fan back on. And usually I like to try to keep the rocks right here in the middle, right where it's nice and hot. And
how many rocks did you say you use for like your standard batch?
What's that?
How many rocks were you saying that you'd like? How many rocks do you have in that in your?
So there's probably I like to use rocks a little bit bigger than your fist, right about fist size. And there's probably about 20 or so in there. And that will definitely keep this boiling the whole time.
And you go what, like 5 at a time, and you just swap out constantly?
Yeah. Pretty much. Like these ones I'm gonna take out right about now just because they're I need to get this up to a boil. Once it's up to a boil, I don't change them out that fast. But you can still hear they still are they're actually boiling. You can, I don't know if you can see that they're actually, the water is coming out of them. Like the water's actually coming out of the rocks.
Hey Dan, how much lumber do you use to heat this?
So I've gone through so far today. I have gone through probably 3 IKEA bags full of wood. And I probably could have used another.
I like the precise measurements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a Stop and Shop bag. It's an IKEA bag.
Nope. That's a blue IKEA bag. As my woodshed is probably a couple of 100 yards that way. No, it's not that far. Sorry, I'm gonna move again. Sorry if everybody's getting sick watching me.
No, it's groovy. When you have a second as well, there's another question lined up from Ryan Durgan.
Absolutely. Go for it.
All right, let me unmute him.
What styles have you tried? I know you said like you can do different ones, but
so far the main one that I love that I always do is a doppelsticker alt and kind of like a doppelsticker erg. and then I've done a bock, and then this is just kind of a quarantine ale. It was a bunch of stuff that I had kind of kicking around. It's got I've got pills. It's 10 pounds of pills, 5 pounds of Munich. There is apple. I actually wanted to have some smoke in this, so I put some applewood smoked malt in there. And then I think that's pretty much it. And midnight wheat. Put some midnight wheat in there.
Does it affect the SRM, do you think? Does it make it any darker?
I don't know. I don't know if I could really say yes or no to that. That one's.
Yeah, I gotta say, I think that this would be a really cool idea for a large scale ribs brew day to get once this is all lifted and we're allowed to be within 6 feet of each other again. I think it would be a really cool idea to have like a large scale, like 3 different Steinbiers going to test those experiments. That's just my feeling.
Grab this. See if we can hear these guys go in. Oh, sorry.
Coming in hot.
Coming in hot.
Nice. Alex, I'm gonna unmute you.
Thank you.
Alex, you're good.
So first and foremost, Dan, whenever I heard there was a Steinbier talk, I thought you were going to talk about Steinbier. So fuck that, dude. Super good all the way. But
I'm not that good at talking. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so actually to Patrick's point, I remember last year you had a call out for like anyone that wants to come over for your previous Steinbier day, which I know.
Yeah, today, this week was actually supposed to be when we were going to do it.
Yeah. So awesome time, like you were such a gracious host last year. But I think the most important question that I have, and I think Durgan would agree with me, is how is your pup doing?
Oh my God, she was out here earlier.
I saw the picture of her. She's not out with you anymore?
Yep, no, she's not out with me anymore. She's snuggled up with the kids in bed.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that was my question, Patrick. I'm sorry I wasn't serious, guys. But,
That's
I
fine.
want to thank Dan for doing this and Dan ask about his awesome English Bulldog.
Yeah, she's awesome. Oh, no.
I'm muting Alex. Fog man. You're good, Josh.
Oh, hey. Oh, sorry. Hey, what do you do about the mash? Do you use stones for the mash water too, or?
I don't. I've never. I definitely want to do one with actually mashing with the stones. I think you'd probably get more caramelization and more of a flavor out of that.
Yeah.
Than probably just using it like this, just for the main, just as the main boiling, point.
Yeah, probably intensify things.
Yeah.
Yes. I actually think this fire is cooling down quite a bit. So the rocks aren't going in as hot. Yeah, when we did it last year, we tried to keep them basically as hot as possible. When we do the real big batch, when we do the 35-gallon batch, I actually have 2 blast furnaces and we get them both going. And I will use bigger rocks for those too, rather than just these small guys.
How many gallons did you say you have in there?
This is just a 5-gallon batch.
And your usual batch is how many?
When we do the big ones, they're usually 30-gallon batch. Last year for the Steinbier day, we actually had some people from the North Shore Brewers came down, some of my friends. And what we did was we split the batch. We made a 30-gallon batch. They took 15 and we took 15, and we all did different fermentations, different yeasts with them. I think we served Ed's at HomebrewCon last year. Mine went horribly sour because I was horrendously drunk by the end of the day and was less than sanitary with everything I did. which you wouldn't think would matter, but once, you know, you treat this like a normal beer once you get past the boiling stage, you know, it can spoil just like anything else.
Makes sense.
So
Wait,
this
any more questions? Or?
this is up to a good boil. I can actually hear it bubbling in there
Nice.
already. So, I mean, as far as quick, well, we were about 15 minutes into going from, you know, mash temp up to boil.
Very cool. Yeah.
And
so
tonight's going to be probably a short and shoddy one.
hey man, beer is beer. Yeah, I don't see any questions left in the queue, so I think you're free to just ad lib as you wish. And
I mean, if anybody has anything,
it's your say when you want me to mute you back.
There's a good one.
So, nobody else has any more questions. We just want to thank you for doing this for us.
It's my pleasure. I mean, I'm not a very great speaker, but I mean, hell, I can light some rocks on fire.
Yeah.